Every year, Disability History Month runs from the 16th of November through to the 16th of December. It covers Anti-Bullying Week, International Day of People with Disabilities, all the way through to December the 10th, which is International Human Rights Day. This year's theme focuses on the experience of disablement amongst children. It gives us the chance to raise awareness of how things were in the past, develop an understanding of how they are now, and be more informed to make decisions that deliver a positive change in the future. As of today, there's an estimated 16 million people in the UK living with a disability. Of this number, around 1.8 million or 11% are children aged 17 or younger. For these children, there is a palpable disparity in experience and outcomes. For example, the number of children with special education needs support represents 17.3% of all pupils in 2023. Of this number, just over a third go on to achieve 5 or more GCSEs at grade C or higher, which is 42% lower than students with no identified special educational needs. Away from the classroom, the Crime Survey for England and Wales reported that in the 12 months leading up to 2023, that disabled children aged 10 to 15 were twice as likely as non-disabled children to have been a victim of a crime. Fast forward to adulthood and the gap in outcomes continues to persist and presents itself by way of disabled adults in the UK being up to 28% less likely to be in employment and earn up to 35% less than their non-disabled counterparts. The supports available for disabled children in 2023 contrast like night and day when compared with what was, or more importantly what wasn't in place just over 100 years ago. Let's start with the 1918 Education Act, which made schooling for all disabled children compulsory. It meant that by 1921, there were more than 300 dedicated institutions for blind, deaf, crippled, tubercular and epileptic children. In 1946, the National Society for Mentally Handicapped Children, also known as MENCAP, was established. In 1970, the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act was the first in the world to recognise and give rights to people living with a disability. The Act gave people with disabilities the right to equal access to recreational and educational facilities. In addition, local authorities were also given the duty of providing special educational facilities for children that were both blind and deaf. This provision was later extended to include autism and dyslexia, with the expectation that the level of education provided was to be at the same level as that available in other local authority schools. The 1981 Education Act laid down that children should be educated in mainstream schools or classes wherever possible. In the year 2000, the Carers and Disabled Children Act meant that young disabled people aged 16 and 17 became eligible to receive direct payments and purchase their own care support. Hopefully, that gave you an idea as to some of the legislative steps we've taken as a society to move away from a history of discriminatory practices, neglect, and segregation. Needless to say, there's still work to be done, specifically when it comes to bringing about positive change in the way we think about impairment and disablement. To do this, we might start by rejecting ideas of normal while encouraging acceptance, inclusion, and participation of people living with a disability. We can also use our privilege to challenge stigma, which includes misconceptions, attitudes, and the language we use. Case in point, it wasn't until the late 1980s that the Department of Health started to officially use the term people with learning disabilities. Before this, previously acceptable terms included mentally defective, ineducable, backwards, subnormal, and mentally handicapped. And so if this wasn't clear already, words and the way we use them to describe the experience of another have meaning. With this in mind, the social model of disability in schools gives us some food for thought. It suggests that disabled children's individual and collective disadvantage is due to a complex form of institutional discrimination, which is exacerbated by an obsession for finding medically based cures which distract from looking at the causes of impairment in the first place. In the medical model, a person with a disability is seen as the problem. They are diagnosed, labelled, and focused on fixing their impairment. Society remains unchanged. In the social model of disability, a disabled person's strengths and needs are defined by themselves and others. Barriers are identified and solutions are developed using an outcome-based program, and adequate training is provided for parents and professionals. Society evolves. For more information about the history and lived experience of disabled children in the UK, Tales of Childhood Resistance by Micheline Mason tells the remembered story of one such child born in the 1950s with an impairment called osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bones. Her story highlights some horrific memories of children's wards back then, alongside the support provided by her unusual working-class family. The Empty Hours was published by Maureen Oswin in the early 1970s. It explored the lives of children who are permanently hospitalised due to a learning disability, mental illness, or physical disability. She uses this research to argue for an updated system of care that would allow these children to participate in the outside world. You can find links to both of those books in the description, and if you've learned something new from this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel as we continue to raise awareness of the factors that keep inequality in place on our way to making the conversation about mental health, well-being, and inclusion more accessible.